In this video, you're going to see how to rig Power Prawn lures onto jig heads, and we have two options. We have a traditional jig head where the hook is exposed. This has the best hookup ratio. Obviously, the con is that there's higher odds of getting snagged on the bottom. And then here is a new style, which is weedless. And so this is called the Hoss Weedless Football Jig. The benefit is that it's super weedless and can get right down there in the structure where a lot of the feeding takes place. The con, though, is that the hookup ratio isn't quite as good as traditional, but it is surprisingly good for how weedless it is. And so what I'll do is I'll share some really hacks to make sure that you get the most longevity out of every lure for both of these situations. There's some tricks that will significantly increase how many fish you catch per lure. So since the weedless football is my personal favorite and it seems like this is where most people make mistakes, we're gonna go ahead and start there. And so here's what it looks like without the lure on there. So it basically looks really strange. This is a new style jig head, but when done properly, this is extremely effective. So essentially what this is, it's a worm hook, a really thick worm hook. This is a beefed up worm hook that is strong enough for big saltwater fish, and it has a swiveling jig head on there, swiveling football shaped jig head. And a big mistake most people make is they don't take the plastic all the way up the top. They leave the jig head swiveling around. I've tried it both ways, and locking the head, right, having the plastic all the way up to the head where the head barely wobbles at all, that actually gets the best results as far as fooling the biggest fish. Also, it has the best longevity, right? The more material you have in between the bend of the hook, which is what keeps the plastic up on the hook, and the jig head, right? The more plastic you have there, the more fish you can catch per lure, because there's just more plastic that has to be torn before it's compromised. So here's a demonstration on how to rig it to maximize overall results. So I like to have the jig head in the right hand, the Power Prawn in the left, and I like to have the underbelly, right? The underbelly of the Power Prawn needs to be facing towards the jig head, and then the hook of the jig head needs to be facing toward the Power Prawn. So first step is just to go right down the middle, dead center, and go straight down. And to determine how far down into this plastic you go, you want to basically cover the same distance from the top part of this jig head up to the shank of the hook. That's the amount of plastic that we want this hook to go through. So we go down to about that same distance, and then we'll pop it out dead center, right? Dead center, right in the middle of the lure. You want it to be dead center. If it's a little bit off, it is not good. Go ahead and redo it. And so we can just eyeball check that this does look like the proper amount of material. So we'll go ahead and thread it up. And now this is the tough part. We have to go around this bend in the hook. And the goal here is just to do as little damage as possible to the lure itself. So what I like to do is I just thread it down and twist it. So I twist it so that the underbelly starts bending in towards the bottom of the hook. So just do a quick little twist, take it over the hump. Now we have it over the hump. We're just going to get all the material up over that last little edge. And now you can see this jig head, this weight, is now fixed in place. If you're fishing docks and this head is swiveling, it is going to just plummet the ability to skip. It is actually horrible. But when this thing is fixed, when it's fixed like this, it skips much better. So that is a very big deal. A big misconception is that the swiveling head gives it more action. That's not true. I've done underwater video footage, and it basically has the same action either way. So again, just make sure to go all the way up, lock that head in place, and you'll be good to go. And so now the last step is to take the hook through the belly. So a shortcut is just to put the hook right into the underbelly. And now we can just basically put our thumb right where that hook will naturally go through, and just do a quick turn, 90-degree turn, and put that hook right through at that point. And this is a perfectly rigged Power Prawn shrimp lure. It is right dead center. Everything's aligned. This is going to have great action in the water. And how it is right now is very weedless. If we want to get ultra weedless, if we're fishing around some riprap where there's all sorts of snags, and we just want to make sure that this hook point just can't get a hold of any of them, what we do is it's called skin hooking. So what you do is you just pull the material forward and then push it up over the hook point, and then basically bury that hook point into the material. Now this is as streamlined as it gets. There's really no way to have a lure that is more weedless than this. This is the exact setup I use for dock fishing now, and the same premise holds true when I go out the reefs. I just use a heavier jig head. This is my reef setup, where it's just a heavier jig head, same premise, and this is shockingly effective at getting big fish around structure without getting snagged. And just so you know, we have the same rig available for the Power Prawn USA Junior, right? The one on the left, it's a lot smaller, so we have a 3/0 hook for the Junior, and the original one gets a 4/0 hook. And so just be mindful of the hook size when you're selecting your riggings for each of these respective lures. And so now to show how to rig on a traditional jig head, and just so you know, I'll show a trick that a lot of people don't know about, and it significantly increases the lifespan of the lure. And so basically, here's the jig head in case you're new to it. And the goal is to have this lure, right, to rig this lure so that it is still in its natural form. If we rig it properly, it's going to be nice and straight and streamlined. If we mess up, there's going to be a big kink, right? If there's any sort of kink where it has a hard turn anywhere in the lure, that is going to decrease the results of how it swims in the water, and that is not going to be good. So now time to rig it, and same premise, same start point at least, where the jig head is in the right hand, the power prawn is in my left. I just keep it consistent, and it'll significantly help overall results. The only difference at this step from the traditional jig head versus the weedless is that the underbelly in this case is going away from the jig head at the starting point. So the underbelly is facing towards the left here. And to start, we take that hook point right through the center and just go straight down the overall center of the lure. We want to be centered based on this axis and also this axis. So just go straight down the lure, and where we want to pop out, you can see these ridges. There's some ridges on this lure. This is the original, and this is the 4/0 hook, and we want to basically pop out right at that ridge, right on the top, right where that ridge is on the shrimp. And so we're just going to go and pop it out right there. And so before we go to the next step, I just wanted to make sure just to note the bend. Here is the proper angle that you want to see before we go over the keepers, because every time we go over the keepers, it's going to damage some of the material. So we want to do this ideally the first time properly, because if there's no bend at all, if this shrimp was perfectly straight right now, once we thread it up over this keeper, it's now going to kick the tail way off to the bottom. That's not good. And if it was too far over, now even when we put it up, it's not going to be straight. Once it's done, we want this thing to be perfectly straight. And so again, this is the angle to look at. So the hack I was talking about for making sure that we get the most bang for our buck is these keepers. They're both vertical, right? They're vertical in relation to the hook point. And we know that these keepers will tear the material. So what we want to do is instead of just pushing the lure straight up while the lure is in the same axis that we're going to be using it, we want to twist the lure, right? So we want to give a 90-degree twist. And now when we shove it up over the keeper, now that tearing is being done to the sides, right? And so now once we get it up to the jig head, we turn it back, rotate it back. So now the only tearing that we did is right here on the sides, on the two sides. And then as far as where those barbs are, you know, the barbs are right here. So all the material from the barb up to the top has not been compromised, and it's going to hold this lure on there extremely good. It's going to significantly increase the lifespan of the lure. And so just like before, right, when we just want to evaluate if we rigged it properly or not, yes, this is done right because the shrimp is perfectly aligned. It's nice and straight when we look at it from the side. It's also nice and straight when we look at it from the bottom or the top. So this lure, again, these lures, when rigged properly, these things are shockingly good for fooling the biggest and smartest fish and also quantities of fish, but it's all about rigging. So that's why I wanted to go through both these styles slowly so that you can see exactly how it's done. The more precise this is done, the more fish you're gonna be catching with these lures. And now that I've been using these and I'm just quick at rigging them, these lures are by far the most productive for catching my biggest fish. My overall catch size is the biggest. And if it's a slow day when nothing else working, I go to this lure, and I go to this one in particular with the weedless jig head, especially for dock fishing. I like the 1/4 ounce because it skips better, but this is just absolutely deadly for fishing tight to structure when the fish aren't very aggressive. They're going to be holding on the bottom, close to structure. They're not going to swim and chase down the lure. And so this is the best lure that I've found so far for really getting close to the structure without getting snagged and still having a nice lifelike look, plus very good darting motion under the water to trigger strikes even from fish that aren't hungry. And in case you're wondering why the football shape is effective, yes, these power prawns can be rigged on a ton of jig heads, but I really like the football shape best because when it lands, just looking at the underwater footage, I used to use round ball jig heads, and every once in a while I would pivot around, and it just doesn't look nearly as lifelike. If you look at a shrimp, when they get on the bottom, they stay upright. They're not waffling around, and so this jig head, it just keeps it upright. And as I mentioned before, this setup has just been shockingly good for catching lethargic fish, even big ones when they're not hungry. We just can't help but to take a swipe at a nice looking little shrimp. So that's it for now. Any questions at all about how to rig, whether it's the weedless football or the traditional style football jig head, leave a comment down below. As always, if you need any of these items, it's all at fishstrong.com. These are exclusive to fishstrong.com, and if you're an Insider Club member, you're going to have 20% off of all of these items Thank you so much for your time and watching. We hope to see you again soon.